Today, I'm going to tell you a story so powerful it leaves a mark on the heart. Out in the American West, where pine forests whisper under a steel-gray sky, and small towns cling to survival between law and chaos. It's the kind of place where one wrong glance can change a life, and where old enemies eventually ride back. And this story begins with something almost invisible, a stranger's tattooed wrist revealed for just a moment, but enough to drag a buried past into the light. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The autumn wind off the Black Hills carried the sharp bite of pine resin and distant wood smoke when Nora Kane first guided the wagon down the rutted main street of Whispering Creek. The Dakota sky stretched wide and merciless above them, pale blue fading to gray at the edges, the kind of sky that promised nothing and took everything without apology. Sadie sat beside her, small hands folded in her lap, gray eyes flicking from one false front building to the next, mercantile saloon livery schoolhouse, like she was already memorizing escape routes. Nora felt the familiar weight of the polished wooden case resting against her thigh under the blanket. Inside it, the custom Colt waited oiled and silent, its pearl grips cool even through the oilskin wrap. They stopped at the Harlan place, a weathered cabin tucked against the pine foothills 3 miles out. The previous owner, a prospector whose claim had been jumped twice, had left in a hurry. The door still hung half-open hinges groaning in the breeze. Nora paid in gold Eagles coins that flashed dull in the low October sun as she counted them into the notary's palm. No questions asked, no names exchanged beyond what was necessary. Days blurred into routine. Mornings, Nora drove Sadie to the schoolhouse where Lila Boone taught with quiet patience. The teacher noticed the girl's sharp mind, the way Sadie calculated distances between fence posts or the angle of sunlight through the window, but said nothing beyond a soft compliment. Afternoons, Nora walked the short path to Buck Landry's mercantile. She bought Flour Nail's lamp oil always, in small amounts, always paying cash. Buck, broad-shouldered and slow-talking, tried once to draw her out. "You come far, Mrs. Kane?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron while she examined a coil of rope. "Far enough," she answered, voice low, eyes on the rope. He nodded, didn't press. But she saw the way he glanced at the wanted poster tacked to the wall behind the counter. 3 sketches, 3 names: Rex Harlan Colt, Harlan Jace Harlan. $2,000 apiece, dead or alive. She let her gaze slide past it like it was nothing more than yesterday's news. She chose the corner table at the back of the mercantile whenever she lingered. From there, she could watch the front door, the side alley, the street beyond the window. Sadie would sit beside her sometimes, reading from a worn primer. But Nora felt the child's attention shift, watching the same angles, the same strangers. It hurt more than Nora wanted to admit that practiced calm in a 10-year-old's face. One afternoon, the air inside the mercantile felt thicker than usual, heavy with stove heat and the smell of tobacco. A drifter leaned against the counter, dust still clinging to his coat hat low. He asked Buck for directions to Deadwood, voice flat, unhurried. Nora stood at the far end of the aisle, fingering a bolt of calico she had no intention of buying. When the man turned to leave, his sleeve rode up just enough. A snake tattoo curled around his wrist, faded ink, but unmistakable. Her breath caught sharp, involuntary. The same mark she had glimpsed on the hand that drove the knife into Elias's ribs behind the exhibition tent in St. Louis 4 years earlier. The same hand that had vanished into the night while she knelt in the dirt, holding her dying husband. She forced her fingers to unclench from the fabric. The drifter stepped outside, boots scraping the boardwalk, and was gone. Buck looked over. "You all right, Mrs. Kane?" Looked like you seen a ghost? She managed a small smile, the one she had practiced in mirrors across 3 territories. Just the wind, she said. It carries things you'd rather forget. He grunted, returned to stacking tins. Nora paid for the calico she didn't need, walked out into the chill. The street was quiet, except for the creak of a sign swinging above the saloon and the distant hammer of a blacksmith. She kept her pace steady, never looking back. But every nerve told her the drifter had seen her too, had noted the gray eyes, the wooden case. She never sat down the way she moved, like someone who expected the next shot to come from any direction. At the cabin that evening, she sat on the porch while Sadie practiced her letters by lantern light inside. The wind moved through the pines like a long, slow exhale. Nora lifted the wooden case onto her lap thumb, tracing the grain of the lid. She didn't open it. Not yet. She only stared out at the darkening foothills where the first stars were beginning to prick through the gray. Somewhere out there, a man with a snake on his wrist was riding back to report. The quiet she had bought with 4 years of running had just cracked open, and the thing she feared most was already looking for her. The days after the drifter with the snake tattoo left, Whispering Creek felt heavier, as if the air itself had thickened with something unspoken. Nora kept to the same careful rhythm mornings in the small garden behind the cabin, turning the cold Dakota soil with a spade, planting rows of turnips and potatoes that might not survive the first hard freeze. The earth smelled of damp pine needles and frost-kissed clay. She worked slowly, deliberately each motion, a reminder that routine could still hold things together. Sadie rode the pony to school each morning, her small figure disappearing down the trail under a wide-brimmed hat Nora had bought oversized on purpose. At the schoolhouse, Lila Boone greeted her with the same gentle nod. But Nora noticed how Sadie now lingered a moment longer at the door, scanning the street before stepping inside. The girl never complained. She simply came home, sat her primer on the table, and practiced her letters with the same quiet focus she used to trace invisible lines in the dust lines that looked suspiciously like sight pictures. Afternoons, Nora walked into town again. Buck Landry's mercantile smelled of coffee grounds, leather oil, and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder from the back room. She bought more than she needed: a small file, a set of punches, a tin of bore cleaner. For the rifle, she told Buck when he raised an eyebrow. Wolves been howling closer lately. Buck set the tools on the counter without comment. He was stacking tins of peaches when another stranger pushed through the door, taller than the first drifter coat, patched at the elbows, boots caked with trail dust. He leaned on the counter like he owned it, voice low, but carrying in the quiet store. New widow in town, he asked Buck. Gray eyes, keeps to herself. Seen her around. Buck glanced toward Nora, who had moved to the far aisle pretending to study a sack of beans. He hesitated just a heartbeat, then shrugged. Mrs. Kane. Yeah, she's careful. Comes in regular, pays cash, don't talk much. Good neighbor far as I can tell. The drifter nodded slowly, eyes sliding toward the corner where Nora stood. She felt the weight of his gaze like a hand on her shoulder. She kept her back-turned fingers steady on the burlap, but inside her chest, something cold and familiar uncoiled. Buck cleared his throat. You looking for someone particular? Just passing through, the man said. Heard there might be work up near Deadwood. Thought I'd ask around. He bought a plug of tobacco and left boots scraping the boardwalk. Nora waited until the door closed before she approached the counter. Stranger asked about me, she said quietly. Buck met her eyes for the first time, without his usual easy grin. Yeah. Didn't give a name. Just curious, I reckon. She nodded, once paid for the tools, and left without another word. That evening, May Whitaker rode out to the cabin on her old bay mare. She'd brought a jar of preserves, wild plum tart and dark, and set it on the porch rail like an offering. May had been kind since the first day, offering a spare room when the Harlan place wasn't ready, never prying. But tonight, her smile was thinner. "You always sit with your back to the wall," Nora May said, voice soft but direct. "Even here on your own porch." "Why's that?" Nora looked out at the darkening pines instead of answering right away. The wind moved through them with a low moan. She thought of Elias, how he used to laugh at her caution, call it her exhibition habit until the night it wasn't enough. "Habit," she said finally. "Old ones die hard." May studied her a moment longer. "Folks talk, you know. Not mean, just curious. A woman alone with a child, eyes like steel. Some say you've seen things most of us haven't." Nora felt the small crack widen the trust she'd let grow with May fragile, as new ice beginning to fracture. She wanted to explain, to say something that would close the distance, but the words caught behind her teeth. Instead, she only nodded. May sighed, not unkindly. "If you ever need to talk, doors open. That's all." She mounted up and rode back toward town, leaving Nora alone with the jar of preserves and the gathering dark. Later, after Sadie was asleep, Nora sat at the kitchen table with the lantern low. She opened the wooden case for the first time in weeks. The Colt lay there clean and waiting, silver inlay catching the faint light. She ran her thumb along the pearl grips, remembering the weight of it in Denver 4 years ago, the crowd's roar, when she outshot Rex Harlan, the way his face had twisted when the last clay pigeon shattered. She had thought winning would end it. It only started everything else. Outside, an owl called once sharp and lonely. Nora closed the case, latched it, and carried it to the trunk at the foot of her bed. She didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, she watched from the porch as Sadie rode off to school. The trail was empty, but farther down near the bend where the pines thinned, a rider sat motionless on horseback. Too far to make out features, but close enough that Nora knew he was looking straight at the cabin. He didn't move. He just watched. Then he turned his horse and disappeared into the trees. Nora stood there a long time after he was gone, hands tight on the railing, the cold wood biting into her palms. The secret she had guarded for 4 years was no longer hers alone. Someone knew she was here, and they were coming back. The evening air in Whispering Creek had turned sharp, carrying the faint bite of coal smoke from the stoves and the dry rustle of fallen pine needles underfoot. Lanterns flickered along the boardwalk as folks drifted toward Buck Landry's mercantile, drawn by the word that had spread like low fire through the town. And the Harlan gang was moving north again. A stagecoach line near Cheyenne had been hit hard 2 days back. Driver a dead strong box, gone passengers left, bleeding in the dust. Sheriff Cole Harlan had called the meeting himself, voice low and steady when he sent the word out. Nora arrived last, slipping in through the side door. She took her usual place near the back wall, shoulders against the rough planks, arms folded so the wooden case stayed close to her side. The room smelled of tobacco, spit, lamp oil, and the warm, yeasty scent of bread someone had brought in a basket. Men stood shoulder to shoulder. A few women sat on crates near the stove. Sadie was safe at home with May Whitaker tonight. Nora had asked May to stay, claiming a headache. The truth was simpler. She didn't want her daughter hearing what might be said. Buck Landry stood on an overturned barrel so his voice would carry. "Sheriff's got the latest from the Telegraph," he said. "Harlan brothers, Rex, Colt, Jace, they're riding this way. Not just passing. They hit that coach like they meant to send a message." Cole Harlan stepped forward, hat in his hands, the badge on his vest, catching the lamp light. He looked older than his years tonight, lines deeper around the eyes. "We've got maybe a week, maybe less. They don't announce, but they scout. We need eyes open, rifles clean. Volunteers for night watch, extra rounds at the livery if you can spare them. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone near the front, a rancher with a scarred cheek, spoke up. Heard they're meaner than last year, and there's talk. He hesitated, glanced around. Talk about a widow here in town. Quiet one, eyes like steel. Folks say she might know something about guns. Old hand, maybe? The words landed soft, but heavy. Heads turned slowly. Nora felt the shift in the air, the way eyes slid toward her without quite landing. She kept her gaze on the floorboards, counting the knots in the pine, willing her heartbeat to stay even. Cole Harlan's eyes found her for a moment, long enough to notice, not long enough to accuse. He cleared his throat. Let's stick to facts, he said. We don't need rumors. We need rifles and neighbors who'll stand together. The meeting dragged on, talk of barricades at the North Trail, water barrels filled, children kept close after dark. Nora listened without speaking. When it broke up, folks filed out into the cold night, boots thumping on the boards. She waited until the room emptied before moving. Outside, May Whitaker waited by the hitching rail, breath fogging in the lantern glow. She had ridden out earlier than planned, coat buttoned tight against the wind. Her face was pale, mouth set in a thin line. May, Nora said quietly. May looked up, eyes wet but steady. One of those drifters, the tall one with the patched coat, came by the boarding house this afternoon. Asked about you. Said he was looking for a woman with gray eyes who kept a wooden case close. I told him nothing. He leaned in. Said if I was lying, he'd remember. Then he left. Nora felt the words settle in her stomach like lead shot. May had done nothing wrong, said nothing wrong, yet the threat had found her anyway, because of proximity, because of kindness. The small trust Nora had allowed to grow was now a crack others could pry open. I'm sorry, Nora whispered. May shook her head. Don't be. I chose to ask questions. I choose to stay quiet now. She paused, voice dropping. But Sadie, she's asking things too. Today at school, Lila asked about her pa. Sadie came home quiet. Said her pa was good at figuring angles, same as her. Nora closed her eyes for a second. The memory of Elias rose unbidden, his easy laugh, when Sadie was small, the way he'd draw sight lines in the dirt with a stick to teach her distance. Her father was the same. She said the words, tasting like ash. He calculated everything, kept us safe until he couldn't. May touched her arm lightly. You don't have to carry it alone, Nora. Not here. Nora wanted to believe it. Wanted to lean into the offer the way a tired horse leans into a stall. But the weight of what was coming, the brothers who had ordered Elias's death, because a public humiliation had stung worse than Lied, made the words stick in her throat. She only nodded. They parted in silence. May rode back toward the lights of town. Nora walked the dark trail to the cabin, the wooden case bumping against her hip with every step. Inside, Sadie was already in bed, but the lantern still burned low. The girl sat up when Nora entered, gray eyes wide and searching. Ma Nora sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the quilt. You should be sleeping. Lila asked about Pa today. Said, I think like him. I told her he was good at numbers and angles. That's all. Nora swallowed. That's enough. He was very good at seeing things before they happened. Sadie studied her mother's face. Are bad men coming? Nora hesitated. The lie rose easily. Everything's fine, go back to sleep. But it tasted wrong tonight. Instead, she brushed a strand of hair from Sadie's forehead. Men who do bad things are moving through the territory. But we're ready if they come close. Sadie nodded once, small and certain, like the hawk. sees everything, strikes when it has to. Nora's throat tightened. She kissed her daughter's forehead and turned down the lantern. Later, alone on the porch, she stood listening to the night. The wind had dropped. The pines were still. Far off, a coyote yipped, once then fell silent. In the quiet that followed the telegraph key at the depot would have been clicking news of another robbery closer, now the Harlan brothers riding hard, 3 shadows against the prairie horizon. The threat was no longer drifting smoke on the wind. It had a direction, and it was pointed straight at Whispering Creek. The morning broke cold and clear over Whispering Creek, the kind of light that sharpened every shadow and made the dust hang gold in the air. Nora had been up before first light, checking the cabin's locks, twice the Colt Custom already belted low under her coat. Sadie ate breakfast in silence oatmeal and a slice of maize bread, her small spoon moving with the same measured calm Nora had taught her. Neither spoke of the rider who had watched from the pines the day before. Some things didn't need words. They rode into town together. Sadie's pony kept pace beside the wagon, the girl's hat pulled low. At the Mercantile, Nora tied the team and lifted Sadie down. "Stay close today," she said, voice steady but quieter than usual. Sadie nodded once, gray eyes flicking to the street. Inside Buck Landry's store, the air was thick with stove heat and the smell of fresh ground coffee. Sheriff Cole Harlan stood near the counter talking low with Buck about night patrols. A few townsmen lingered, rifles leaning against the wall like they'd been waiting for something to happen. Nora moved to her corner, back to the planks, Sadie at her side with a small sack of nails they didn't really need. Then the door opened. 3 men stepped in, dusty, broad-shouldered, moving with the loose confidence of men who had never feared a room full of strangers. Rex Harlan led tall and scarred his coat open to show the twin revolvers at his hips. Cole Harlan followed, eyes restless, hand never far from his knife. Jace, the youngest, brought up the rear, scanning the shelves like he was already choosing what to take. Nora knew them before they spoke. The way Rex carried his shoulders, the slight limp in Colt's left leg, from an old wound, the cold calculation in Jace's gaze. 4 years hadn't changed the shape of their hate. Rex's eyes found her almost immediately. He stopped, head tilting, a slow smile curling under the scar that ran from temple to jaw. He crossed the room in 3 strides, boots deliberate on the boards. Cole Harlan's straightened hand drifting toward his own gun. But Rex ignored him. "Well?" Rex drawled, voice low enough that only Nora and Sadie could hear. Quicksilver herself, hiding in this little nowhere. "Thought you'd run forever after Denver." Nora met his gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered hard enough she felt it in her throat. Sadie pressed closer, small hand finding Nora's under the counter. "Name's Nora Kane now," she said quietly. "And you're a long way from Cheyenne?" Rex's smile thinned. "We're just passing through, looking at the lay of the land." His eyes flicked to Sadie. "Pretty girl. Takes after her ma." The threat landed soft but unmistakable. Nora felt the room tilt. She glanced out the window. Jace had already slipped outside, heading toward the schoolhouse trail, toward Lila Boone's classroom, toward Sadie if she'd been there alone. She turned back to Rex. "Leave the girl out of it." Rex leaned in breath, smelling of tobacco and trail dust. "You made this personal when you shamed me in front of 200 people. Now we finish it." Behind the counter, Buck's hand moved slow, reaching for the shotgun racked below. Cole Harlan stepped forward, voice calm but edged. "That's enough, Harlan. You're in my town." Rex laughed once short and without humor. "Your town's about to learn what happens when you harbor old enemies." Nora's hand found the shotgun Buck had eased toward her. She lifted it in one smooth motion, barrel low, but steady. The room went still. "Sadie," she said, voice low and even. "Go to May. Cellar under the apothecary. You know the way." Sadie didn't hesitate. She slipped behind the counter, small feet silent on the boards, and vanished through the back door. Nora heard the latch click shut. Rex's eyes narrowed. "You think you can still play the widow? I'm done playing," Nora said. She stepped out from the corner, shotgun leveled. Cole Harlan drew his revolver, covering Colt. Buck grabbed a Winchester from the wall. Outside shouts rose, townsmen spotting the third Harlan brother near the school trail. Rex raised his hands a fraction, still smiling. "You won't shoot in here. Too many innocents." Nora's finger tightened on the trigger guard. She remembered Elias's last breath, the blood warm on her hands, the way Rex's men had laughed as they rode off. The memory tasted like iron. She fired, once clean, deliberate, into the dirt floor between Rex's boots. Splinters flew. The report cracked through the store like thunder in a closed room. "That was a warning," she said. "Next one's through your gun hand. Tell your brother to back off my daughter." Rex's smile vanished. He stared at her, recognition hardening into something colder. "You just made a mistake, Kate." "My name's Nora Kane," she answered, "and this town's under my watch now." Outside, Jace froze mid-step on the trail, hands rising slow, as Finn Barlow and two other men leveled rifles from the livery roof. Sadie reached May at the apothecary door. The older woman pulled her inside without a word. Nora stepped onto the boardwalk, shotgun still up. The street had emptied, doors slamming, shutters closing, but Cole Harlan followed her out, revolver steady. Rex backed toward his horse, eyes never leaving Nora. "This ain't over." She didn't answer. She only watched him mount, watched Colt and Jace follow, watched the three of them ride slow out of town like men who knew they'd be back. The silence that settled afterward was thick, broken only by the creak of cooling stove iron inside the mercantile and the distant bark of a dog. Nora lowered the shotgun. Her hands shook just a little, but she hid it by resting the barrel against her thigh. Cole Harlan holstered his gun and looked at her long. "Quicksilver," he said quietly, like he was testing the word. "From Buffalo Bill's show. Thought that story ended in St. Louis?" Nora met his eyes. It did. For Elias. For me, it just kept going. She turned back toward the cabin trail, the wooden case suddenly heavier than it had ever been. The old life, the quiet widow, the hidden Colt, the hope of safety was gone in one clean shot. And whatever came next would cost more than silence could ever buy. The jailhouse in Whispering Creek smelled of old iron, damp stone, and the faint copper tang of blood. Rex Harlan sat on the rough bench in the center cell, right hand wrapped in a filthy bandage, where Nora's bullet had shattered bone and tendon. Colt paced the adjoining cage like a caged wolf, cursing under his breath. Jace sat silent against the wall, eyes fixed on the floor. Sheriff Cole Harlan stood outside the bars, arms folded, watching them, the way a man watches a snake that might still strike. Nora waited in the doorway, shotgun cradled in the crook of her arm. The street outside had gone quiet. After the standoff, folks shuddered in their homes, waiting for the next sound of hooves. She could feel the weight of their eyes, even through the walls. Cole spoke first, voice low. "Telegraph came in 20 minutes ago. Rest of the gang's holed up at Cottonwood Springs, 7 miles southeast. Waiting for a signal from these three. If it don't come by sundown tomorrow, they'll come looking. And they'll come hard." Nora nodded once. She had known this was coming the moment Rex's smile vanished on the boardwalk. She stepped closer to the bars. Rex lifted his head, eyes glittering with pain and something darker. "You think you've won, Kate?" he rasped. My name's Nora Kane, she said again, the words sounding thinner each time she spoke them. And I haven't won anything yet. She turned to Cole. We need to keep them from riding in blind. One chance to break their spine before they reach town. Cole studied her a long moment. You got a plan? I've got the start of one. She looked at Rex. You're going to write a letter. Tell your boys you've moved on, found better pickings south near the border. Regroup there, sign it. Rex laughed, short and bitter. And why the hell would I do that? Because if you don't... Nora said quietly, I'll make sure every saloon from here to Deadwood tells how Quicksilver outdrew Rex Harlan in the middle of the street, then watched him beg. Your name dies today one way or another. Something flickered in Rex's eyes, not fear of death, but of erasure. In their world, reputation was the only thing that outlived a man. He stared at her, then slowly nodded. Cole unlocked the cell long enough for Rex to scrawl the note on a scrap of paper, left hand shaking. Nora read it twice, folded it, and handed it to Buck Landry, who had been waiting outside. You're the drunk prospector, she told him. Stumbled on easy money from a scarred man heading south. Deliver it to the scouts they've got watching the East Ridge. Make it convincing. Buck took the paper jaw tight. I ain't much for play acting. You've prospected 3 years before this store, Nora said. You know how to look desperate. He nodded, tucked the letter inside his coat, and rode out under the fading light. Back at the cabin, Sadie waited in the root cellar beneath the apothecary with May Whitaker. The space was small, lit by a single lantern. Sadie sat cross-legged on a crate, sketching angles and sight lines on a scrap of paper with a charred stick. May watched her shotgun across her knees. You're awful calm, child, May said softly. Sadie didn't look up. Ma says preparation beats desperation. I'm preparing. May's eyes softened, but the worry stayed. By dusk, the town had turned into a quiet fortress. Nora walked the lines with Cole Finn Barlow and a handful of others, teaching them where to stand, how to cover the approaches, when to hold fire. She spoke low, patient, correcting a man's stance, here adjusting a rifle barrel there. No one called her Quicksilver. They called her Mrs. Kane. But the way they listened said they knew. Night fell heavy. The wind carried the smell of pine pitch and distant snow. Nora returned to the jail once more. Rex was staring at his ruined hand. You'll pay for this, he said, voice flat. I already have, Nora answered. She thought of Elias's face in the lantern light 4 years ago, the way his eyes had dimmed. The memory pressed against her ribs like a stone. She left without another word. Dawn came gray and reluctant. Buck returned before full light, horse-lathered face, grim but steady. They took the letter, he said. Read it right there on the ridge. Swallowed it whole. Started breaking camp before I was out of sight. Heading south toward Apache Pass like you figured. Nora exhaled slowly. The town exhaled with her. But the relief lasted only until the next rider came in hard from the east, a young cowhand named Tom, who had volunteered to scout the far ridge. He never made it back alive. Finn Barlow found him an hour later sprawled in the sagebrush, with a single hole through his chest, eyes still open to the sky. They brought him in on a litter. May covered him with a blanket. Sadie stood in the doorway of the apothecary, watching in silence. Nora knelt beside the body a long moment. The boy couldn't have been more than 20. She touched his cold hand, once then stood. Cole met her eyes. They know now. Someone slipped the net. Rex is still breathing, and Colt's already whispering to the guards about breaking out. Nora looked toward the jailhouse. Through the small window, she could see Colt's silhouette pacing again, lips moving in silent promise. She felt the responsibility settle deeper, not just for Sadie anymore, but for every soul in this town who had trusted her enough to stand with her. The wind picked up, carrying the faint, far-off sound of hoofbeats fading south. But closer in the jail, a low voice murmured through the bars, Cole Harlan swearing on blood that he would see Whispering Creek burn. Nora turned away from the window. The letter had bought them time. It had not bought them peace. The days after the Harlan gang scattered felt like the hush after a rifle shot long ringing, waiting for the echo. Whispering Creek tried to settle back into its rhythms. The blacksmith's hammer rang steady again. Children ran the boardwalk. Smoke curled from chimneys against the pale November sky. But the quiet carried an edge. Folks nodded to Nora when she passed, but their eyes lingered. Some tipped their hats with respect. Others looked away too quickly. She felt the shift in every glance, every half-whisper that died when she drew near. 3 weeks after Rex and Jace were chained for the long ride to federal court, Major Harlan Ford rode in alone. He arrived at dusk, coat dusted with trail grit, horse lathered from the long haul up from Cheyenne. Cole Harlan met him at the jailhouse steps. The two men spoke low for a few minutes before Ford's boots turned toward the cane cabin trail. Nora was on the porch when he dismounted. Sadie sat beside her knees, drawn up sketching on a scrap of paper lines and angles that mapped the cabin's sight lines to the road, the ridge, the creek. The girl looked up once, then went back to her work without a word. Ford removed his hat. Mrs. Kane. Or should I say, Quicksilver Nora's stomach tightened, but her face stayed still. Major, coffee's hot if you're inclined. He accepted the tin cup she handed him and sat on the rail. The wind moved through the pines with a low sigh. Ford sipped once, then set the cup down. I knew Elias Kane, he said quietly. Served with him in the war. Fine officer. Better man. What happened in St. Louis? That wasn't justice. It was a failure we've all carried. Nora looked out at the darkening foothills. The memory of Elias rose sharp, his hand in hers under the exhibition lights, the way he'd smile when she shattered a target clean. Then the tent flapped, the blood and the laughter fading into the night. She swallowed once. Ford continued. Word of what you did here reached Yuma before the prisoners did. You broke the Harlan gang without a badge, without a warrant. The territorial governor wants that mind working for us. Civilian consultant to the marshals. No uniform, no politics, just your knowledge of their networks, their habits. In exchange, full pardon for anything in your past. Protection for the girl. You keep this place. Nora's fingers tightened on the porch rail. The offer hung between them like smoke safety legitimacy, a way to stop running. But it meant stepping fully into the light. Quicksilver would no longer be a ghost. She would be a name on paper, a voice in reports, a target again. Inside the cabin, Sadie's pencil scratched softly. Nora glanced through the window. The girl had paused, listening. I need time, Nora said. Ford nodded. Take it. But know this, Cole Harlan slipped his chains 2 nights ago near Gila Bend. 3 guards dead. He's gone to ground, but drifters are already asking questions in Bisbee. About a widow named Kane. About a woman who outshot Rex Harlan in the street. The words landed heavy. Nora felt the old fear coil in her chest, not for herself, but for Sadie, for the town that had started to feel like home. Ford mounted up again. Think on it, Mrs. Kane. Doors open. He rode off into the twilight, leaving only the sound of hooves fading and the smell of pine smoke. That night, after Sadie was asleep, Nora sat at the kitchen table. The lantern threw long shadows across the walls. She opened the leather-bound book she had kept closed for months, the one filled with clippings. notes, sketches of trails and hideouts. Pages yellowed at the edges, ink faded in places. She turned to a fresh page and began a new entry under Cole Harlan's name, last sighting escape route, known associates dynamite rumored in his kit. Her hand shook once, only once, when she wrote Elias's name in the margin beside Colt's. She stared at it a long time, then closed the book. Sadie's voice came soft from the doorway. Ma Nora looked up. The girl stood there in her nightshirt, bare feet, on the cold boards holding the sketch she'd been working on. I heard the major, Sadie said. About Pa. About the men. Nora set the book aside. Come here. Sadie crossed the room and climbed onto her lap. Nora wrapped her arms around the small frame, feeling the steady heartbeat against her own. Some folks in town are whispering, Sadie said quietly. They call you Quicksilver. Say you're a killer. Others say you saved us. Which one are you? Nora rested her chin on Sadie's head. The question cut deeper than any bullet. I'm your ma, she answered after a long silence. The rest, I did what I had to. For Elias. For you. For this place. Sadie nodded against her shoulder. I drew the cabin today. Blind spots. Good places to watch from. Nora looked down at the paper-precise lines angles marked every approach covered. A child's hand, but the mind behind it was no longer a child's. She kissed Sadie's forehead. We'll keep it close, just in case. Sadie went back to bed. Nora stayed at the table lantern burning low. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the faint, far-off sound of a horse moving slow along the ridge trail, too deliberate to be a stray rider. Somewhere in the dark Colt, Harlan was asking questions, and he was carrying more than curiosity. Nora closed the book. The past had found her again. This time there would be no running. The moon hung low and thin over the Diablo ridges, a sliver of cold silver that barely touched the broken rock and twisted juniper below. Nora moved on foot through the narrow draw-horse left tied in a hidden hollow a mile back. The night air smelled of dry sage and frost, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Each step was deliberate boot soles rolling soft on loose shale, so no pebble shifted loud enough to betray her. She had ridden out at dusk, telling Cole Harlan only that she was scouting the North Ridge. He had looked at her like he knew better, but he hadn't argued. The town stayed guarded May Whitaker at the cabin, with Sadie Finn Barlow on the livery roof, with a rifle Buck Landry walking the main street with a shotgun. They trusted her plan because they had no other. The camp lay in a natural bowl of stone cliffs, rising three sides, a thin spring seeping from the rock face. 3 horses stood picketed near a rough prospector's cabin, reinforced with fresh logs. A low fire burned coals glowing red under a blanket of ash. Nora crouched on a ledge above breath slow, and even watching. Colt Harlan paced near the fire-bandaged, shoulder-stiff voice, carrying on the still air. She's gone to Tucson by now, chasing shadows like we wanted. 2 more days. Then we ride in quiet. Dynamite goes under the sheriff's office first, then Landry's store, then the schoolhouse. Burn it clean while they sleep. A second man, Slade nodded, feeding sticks to the flames. The third kept watch on the lower slope. Nora's stomach turned. The schoolhouse, Sadie's classroom. Lila Boone's blackboard still marked with yesterday's lessons. She felt the old rage rise, but she pushed it down cold and controlled. This was no longer about revenge. It was about ending the threat before it reached home. She slipped down the fissure she had marked earlier, a narrow chimney in the rock that opened above the camp. Halfway, a stone shifted under her boot. It clattered once small but sharp in the silence. Conversation below stopped. Check it, Colt snapped. Slade moved uphill, rifle raised. Nora pressed flat against the stone, breath held. The man passed within 10 feet, eyes sweeping the dark. She waited until his footsteps faded, then dropped the last few feet into shadow behind the cabin. Inside, by the dim glow of a lantern, she found what she needed: rolled maps on the table, red X's, marking the sheriff's office, Buck's Mercantile, the school. Dynamite 4 sticks, fuses coiled beside them. She tucked the maps into her coat, then moved to the picket line. One quick slice of her knife freed the ropes. She fired a single shot skyward. The report cracked across the ridges like breaking glass. The horses exploded into panic, bolting into the night, hooves thundering on stone. Shouts erupted below. The camp, get back. Nora crouched in the cabin doorway. Winchester steady. Slade charged into the clearing first. Her shot caught him center chest. He folded without a sound. The second man dove for cover, but she had the angle. His leg broke under the bullet. He screamed, rolling in the dirt. Colt advanced slow, using boulders for cover, firing wild. Splinters flew from the door frame, inches from Nora's cheek. She held position, counting breaths. "You're boxed in," Kate Colt called, voice thick with pain and hate. "Drop it. I might make it quick." She stayed silent. Then he broke cover rage, overriding sense, running straight at the cabin, revolver up. Nora's Winchester spoke once. The bullet struck true, high center chest. Colt staggered, disbelief frozen on his face, then dropped to his knees and fell forward into the dust. The last man threw his gun aside, hands high. "Don't shoot. I surrender." Nora stepped out, rifle still leveled. Blood seeped warm down her left shoulder. Colt's parting shot had grazed her, tearing cloth and skin. She ignored it, the pain distant, muted by the cold focus that had carried her this far. She bound the survivor's wrists with rawhide, then gathered the dynamite and maps. Before leaving, she knelt beside Colt's body. His eyes stared sightless at the stars. She whispered almost to herself, "Whatever comes, we stand our ground." The words were for Elias, for the man who had believed in law and order until a knife took both from him. She led the prisoner's horse, Colt's body tied across the saddle, and rode back through the dark toward Whispering Creek. Dawn was gray when the town came into view. Cole Harlan and Finn Barlow waited at the edge of the trail, lanterns low. May Whitaker stood behind them, Sadie at her side. The girl ran forward the moment she saw her mother, arms open. Nora dismounted, wincing as the wound pulled. Sadie stopped, short, eyes on the blood-soaked sleeve, then on the body draped over the horse. "Is it over?" Sadie asked, voice small. Nora knelt, pulling her daughter close despite the pain. "The threat's gone. Colt won't hurt anyone again." Sadie nodded against her shoulder, but her eyes lingered on the blood on the dead man, on the mother who had come back changed. Nora stood slowly. Cole approached, face grim. "You're hurt. It'll mend," she said. The town gathered quietly, Buck, Landry, Lila, Boone, a dozen others. They looked at her with something between awe and sorrow. She was no longer just the quiet widow. She was Quicksilver again, the woman who had ended the Harlan threat with her own hands. The price was already settling in her bones, the scar on her shoulder that would ache in every cold wind, the memory of Colt's last look, the knowledge that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Whispering Creek was safe. But the woman who had saved it carried the weight of what she had become. And somewhere in the quiet dawn, the wind carried the faint echo of a single distant shot, whether real or remembered, Nora couldn't tell. The sun rose slow and pale over Whispering Creek, spilling thin gold across the frost-rimed grass and the long shadows of the pines. Nora rode in at the edge of town, with the first light horse walking tired, Colt Harlan's body draped across the saddle behind her. Blood had dried dark on her shoulder, stiffening the cloth, but she sat straight, eyes fixed on the familiar outline of the cabin trail. The prisoner she had taken Slade followed on a lead rope, wrists bound head down. Folks gathered quietly at the edge of the main street. Cole Harlan stepped forward first, face unreadable in the dawn chill. Buck Landry stood beside him, shotgun lowered, but still in hand. May Whitaker waited a pace back, Sadie at her side. The girl broke free the moment she saw her mother running barefoot across the cold ground. Nora dismounted stiffly, pain flaring hot in her shoulder as her boots hit the dirt. Sadie reached her arms, wrapping tight around her waist. Nora held her close, one hand, cradling the back of the small head, breathing in the clean smell of soap and pine from her hair. For a long moment, the world narrowed to that single point of contact. Cole approached, voice low. "You all right, been better?" Nora said. "He's dead. Maps and dynamite are in the saddlebags. Town's safe." Cole nodded once, then looked at the body. "We'll take him to the undertaker. Prisoner goes in the cell till the marshals come." Sadie pulled back just enough to look up. "Is it really over, Ma?" Nora met her daughter's eyes, gray like her own, but carrying a new weight. "The men who wanted to hurt us are gone," she said carefully. "But some things don't end clean." Marshal Boone arrived an hour later, riding in with 2 deputies. He dismounted near the jailhouse, hat in hand, and walked straight to Nora, where she sat on the porch steps, shoulder freshly bandaged by Doc Harlan. Sadie sat beside her, sketching quietly on a scrap of paper, more angles, more sight lines. Boone removed his hat. "Major Ford sends his regards. Word's already spreading. You did what 3 posses couldn't. The governor's offer stands consultant to the marshals. Protection, pardon, a stipend. You name the terms." Nora looked past him to the horizon, where the prairie rolled endless under the rising sun. "I'll take it," she said, after a long silence. "But Sadie stays here. This cabin stays ours. No badge, no uniform." Boone nodded. "Done." He left to arrange the transport of Slade and the body. Nora watched him go, then turned to the leather-bound book resting on her lap. She opened it to the last page on Colt Harlan notes on his escape, the dynamite, the final ridge. With slow, deliberate strokes, she wrote one line at the bottom ended. Then she closed the book for the last time and set it aside. Buck Landry and Cole Harlan came by later. Buck carried a small sack of coffee beans. Cole carried only his quiet respect. "Folks are calling it the Kane Ranch now," Buck said, voice rough. "Figured it fits." Nora managed a small smile. "Fits fine." May Whitaker arrived last, carrying a fresh loaf wrapped in cloth. She set it down and pulled Sadie into a quick, fierce hug. The girl leaned into it, then stepped back to stand beside her mother. When they were gone, Nora and Sadie sat together on the porch as the sun climbed higher. The air warmed slowly, carrying the scent of thawing earth and distant wood smoke. Sadie set her sketch aside and looked out at the wide prairie. She said softly, "Do we still have to run?" Nora felt the question settle deep in her chest. She thought of Elias, his laugh, his steady hands, the way he had believed the world could be better if good people stood their ground. She thought of the shots in the dark, the blood on her coat, the way Sadie's eyes had changed in these last weeks. "No," she said at last. "We don't run anymore." Sadie nodded, small and certain. "Good." They sat in silence as the day unfolded. Nora looked at the sky, wide, clear, no longer something to scan for threats. The horizon stretched empty, peaceful. but the quiet carried its own weight, the scar on her shoulder that would ache every winter, the memory of Colt's final fall, the knowledge that she had ended a life to preserve others. Quicksilver had come home, and she would never fully leave again. Sadie leaned against her head on her shoulder. In time, the girl would tell this story to her own children, perhaps, or to strangers around a fire. She would tell it with pride for the mother who had stood when running would have been easier, and with a quiet sorrow for the childhood pieces left behind. Nora slipped an arm around her daughter. "Now we live, Sadie," she said, voice low against the wind. "Not just survive. Live." The prairie wind answered with a soft sigh through the pines. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, once sharp, free and gone. Nora did not look for more riders on the ridge. But the leather-bound book remained on the table inside, closed, but not forgotten. And in the stillness that followed, the future waited, fragile, hard-won, and forever marked by the choices that had bought it. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.